Boker Tov and Shavua Tov. A good morning and a good week to you people in the Jew Curious community. Hello, heroes. Just going to grab a cup of rocket fuel here, get us going this morning. Oh my goodness gracious, we already have so many tweets coming in. This is the same stream. We've got Daniela saying g'day from Perth, Western Australia. Hope everybody has a wonderful weekend with your loved ones. I'm not gonna lie to you; it has been a hard weekend. In a lot of places in the world. Whatever we learned today, I'd like to dedicate our learning today to the memory of people who were murdered in New Zealand. I would like to dedicate our learning today in honor of the people who, the rescuers and first responders who have helped to protect people. I want to do our learning in honor of those who need strength and healing at this time. As we say in our traditional prayers, refuat nefesh or refuat guf, healing of the body and healing of the soul and spirit, and wish strength to those people who care for people who are in a time of suffering and a time of need. So I wanted to put that right up front here today. And I'd like to start with happy stuff, but I want to acknowledge our responsibility for the state of the world as well. So let's see who else we have here. We have Drake Clark from Huntsville, Alabama. I think I've revealed, maybe not here, I think in another class this week, I kind of outed myself as a huge nerd. And I feel comfortable. That's kind of a compliment these days. So when I think of Huntsville, I think of my 5 days in space camp, let's say 30 and change years ago. So thanks for being here, Drake. We've got a Guten Tag from Germany. And I don't know, maybe it's a Guten Abend there at this point. I'm not sure. We've got good afternoon from New York City. Thank you for being here, Fernando. As my people in Texas say, New York City. We've got hey from Ireland. All right, it's a good day. It's a good day to be from Ireland. It's also one of my sister's birthdays, so I either never forget her birthday or I never forget St. Patrick's Day. So glad everybody's here. Let's see. We've got Teresa is from Cyprus saying happy St. Patty's Day to my Irish friends. What else is going on? We got Grycicle Shalom, y'all. Person after my own heart. I didn't know. I don't normally show my cowboy belt buckle on this. That would be probably immodest of me. But the belt buckle and the belt that I wear most days says exactly that. Shalom, y'all. So we are doing something a little bit different today. We are doing a Sunday brunch. Ask me anything, and I'm just gonna say brunch. It's 9 o'clock here in SoCal. A couple minutes afterwards, might be noon if you're coming in from New York City or from Florida. We get a lot of folks from Florida here. Wherever you are in the world, as we often say, it's noon somewhere. So glad to have you here. Let's see. Teresa saying, learning in honor of my countrymen in Zimbabwe who are suffering from Cyclone Idai. So, of course, anybody who needs healing, anybody who needs protection, we pray to Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, the holy source of our blessing, to send help and healing wherever it is needed in the world. So, I would really like to give a shout out to all the folks in the Jew Curious community. We've been doing live stuff pretty regularly for about 2-3 weeks now. Got another great week lined up. If you're wondering why I do this, why I get on live this week, it'll be 6 times this week coming up, B'ezrat Hashem, with God's help. There's a couple of different reasons. First off, I'm inspired by the example of a particular rabbi that's mentioned throughout our text, but especially in Pirkei Avot. And they were talking about Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who had a number of really successful, influential, learned students. And it said about these different rabbis different things. My personal favorite, and it turns out Rabbi Yochanan's personal favorite, was Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. And it kept saying, okay, he was, of all the students, he was the favorite. Of all the learning, you put him on one scale and the rest of them on the other side of a scale, and he would outweigh them. And the thing that they talked about him, his nickname, if you will, was Mayan Hamit Gaber, right? The fountain that keeps flowing, like the ever-flowing fountain, or the ever self-rejuvenating fountain. And this was this was compared to another rabbi that was called sort of the plastered cistern, meaning he could learn and learn and learn and never forget a single thing. However, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach was noted because not because of what he took in, but because what he gave out. And so it's my goal, my project, to teach as much Torah as I can to as many people, regardless of where you're coming from. And that's my mission here on YouTube and the podcast and social media, and right for the students in the Jew Curious School as well. And so that's why I just decided, like, you don't have to watch all of these. I'm just going to keep showing up. You dip your toe in when you can, and God willing, we'll learn some great Torah together. The other reason I do this is I'm inspired by, let's say, the Ten Commandments, or many of the commandments, especially the one about Shabbat. Now, I'm a big fan of Shabbat. I'm a staunch proponent of taking a day off. We get this commandment, it's said, for two reasons. One, because God created the world in 6 days. On the seventh day, God rested. And if it's good enough for God, it's certainly good enough for us. That's why God set this day apart, was for God's rest and for our rest as well. The interesting thing is, if you look at the different places in the Torah where it mentions the commandment to rest on Shabbat, or Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, remember the Sabbath day, or Shamor et Yom HaShabbat, protect the Sabbath day. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. The other reason we do Shabbat is to remember Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? It says right there, I think I want to say Exodus chapter 20, verse 8-ish is where the Shabbat part starts. And it says, you're going to remember this day because God took you out of Egypt. You are not slaves. You are free. Free people get to take a day off. Free people get to set their work aside. And so not only are we celebrating creation, celebrating that the world, wherever it is, can live without us for one day. We don't have to create, we don't have to destroy. We can let the world be as it is and appreciate that, and then get back to work into making it a better place, which I'll say sometimes we clearly need to do. But every time it talks about the commandment of Shabbat, it always sort of leads off with Sheshet Yamim Ta'avod, Vasiti Kol Malaktecha. Like before it says rest on the seventh day, it says 6 days shall you work. We often forget that part, right? We like the day off. We don't like the 6 days of work. So there's another text somewhere that's been made into a song, No Rest for the Wicked. And so I thought, man, if it's not Shabbat, I want to be out teaching Torah on YouTube. So today we're going to do an Ask Me Anything. And so I'm really grateful for people who have showed up, and thank you. And so I want to jump into some questions here. So if you have a question about anything, let's say anything like remotely Jewish, that's like the narrow area of my expertise, I'd love to hear about it. And so I'm going to lead off with a question from Vanessa. And so anybody else who has questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be looking over the chat, giving shout outs, but mostly just looking for questions to answer, because without your questions, we have no show today. So please help me out here a little bit. All right, going first to Vanessa's question. Is volunteering service okay on Shabbat? And the answer is maybe. In the sense that, okay, when we think about Shabbat, we think about a day suspended from work. Often when we think about volunteering, what is volunteering? Volunteering is like work for free, kind of, right? And one of the ways in which we think about work, when I ask my students when we're thinking about Shabbat, what makes something work? And it's like, well, it's something you do that you get paid for, right? Either you're getting paid on a salary, or you have a business and you're doing something that winds up making you income. And so part of the thing we think of as work is paid work. So if I'm not getting paid, am I really working, right? The other piece of it is volunteering. When we think about volunteering, like what's the definition of volunteering is I'm doing stuff that somebody might normally do for pay, but I'm not getting paid for it. So if it's work that I'm not paid for, is it okay on Shabbat? And so I want to go back to what the rabbis think about how this word melacha, right? As I said before, Sheshet Yamim Ta'avod Vasiti Kol Melachtecha, right? Melachtecha comes from, it means your work, comes from melacha, or work. And there's a bunch of different words for work. There's avodah, there's melacha, and this particular word melacha, we have deduced means sort of skilled labor, right? Things that it's not just like it's not the physics definition of work, like moving a heavy object over space during a period of time. I'm not didn't have that hardcore physics background, mostly an economist here, but it's not the same definition. Like if it makes you sweat, it's not necessarily work, right? It's sort of skilled labor. And furthermore, it's specifically connected to tasks that were done to build the Mishkan. We had this from a couple of parshiot ago where we're talking about the building of the sanctuary, the portable sanctuary that we carry through the wilderness with us. And so the rabbis said, okay, it says, it jumps right in there in the beginning of a particular parsha. It says, no working on Shabbat. And then there's almost like a tangent, and then it goes into here's the work that was done in the Mishkan, and so we derive from that by when we say no work on Shabbat, we mean the no work on these particular things. And like seriously, who's building Mishkan these days? But they derive general categories, no doing things that are required in kind of the arc of creation of making bread, or textiles, or written materials, no finishing projects. No carrying things, from one domain to another or within a public domain. And so it gets really specific on the kinds of things you're not supposed to do. And so there are other texts. There's a particular Mishnah that addresses this. They did this in the Jew Curious School. So if you're part of it, just look back in one of our lessons on Shabbat or that particular parsha. And so there's a Mishnah that lines up all of those different things. And then there's all of, let's say, Masechet Shabbat and the Talmud that really breaks those down, and as well in the Shulchan Aruch that says, here are all the forbidden activities on Shabbat, and here are the different things that we derive from them. So there's a lot of information out there. But let's get back to this question of, can I do volunteer work on Shabbat? And so it's possible if it's in the realm of stuff that you can do on Shabbat anyway, right? If it's things that you can't do, like writing or creating or building or destroying or cooking, things that are normally, let's say, I'm going to stipulate this, if you want to practice Shabbat in a traditional way. For some people, their Shabbat is all about going out and doing things they don't normally get to do during the week, and that might mean volunteering in a soup kitchen and cooking for the needy. Right, and I'm not going to put the kibosh on that if you're not trying to observe the Shabbat in the traditional way. If you are, then you would take a look at the things that you're normally not supposed to do: writing, transacting business, cooking, creative things where you're, writing cards for people or something. Those kind of activities that are normally forbidden on Shabbat are forbidden on Shabbat, whether you are getting paid for it or not, right? However, that leaves a lot of different things that you can do, right? One very popular activity when I was studying in Jerusalem especially, but not just there, is visiting the sick. Right, you can go to a hospital. You sort of travel how you would travel on Shabbat, but you can always go to a hospital and visit a sick person, or visit a sick person at home. There was a particular synagogue that I used to frequent when I was studying in Jerusalem, and it was close to a synagogue. And every week after Shabbat morning services, a big group of people would go from the synagogue over to the nearby hospital to visit sick people. Like that's the mitzvah Bikur Cholim. There's nothing about Shabbat observance that would preclude you from just visiting somebody and talking to them when they are infirm, when they are ill, when they are homebound even. So I think that's a great way to volunteer on Shabbat. So I would just think about it in terms of, okay, what are some things that for your Shabbat practice you normally refrain from? If you would refrain from them for money, you would also probably refrain from them on a volunteer basis, but then look at the realm of things that you can do. Like if you are within an Eruv, you can carry food, and so maybe carry food to somebody who's hungry, right? Invite people to go to the synagogue with you. There's all sorts of different ways you can volunteer. So if you're seeking a traditional Shabbat, traditional Jewish observance of the Sabbath, be creative and think about those things that you can do, and then make that your Shabbat volunteer priority. So that's my answer to that question. I hope that's helpful for you, Vanessa. So let's just see what else is out there. Drake says, I have an odd question. I'll be the judge of that. Okay, Drake. I know there are rules about kosher and non-kosher animals used for food, but are there any rules for pets? My family and I keep pet snakes, so I couldn't help but wonder. Uh, Vanessa answer. I love it when students jump in and answer questions. This is awesome. Like as Vanessa says, and this is absolutely true. And I don't know if this is Drake's question, but it's something everybody needs to know. Pets don't need to keep kosher. Right? So just to be real clear about that, what Vanessa says is right. Judaism. This is going to sound terribly conceited or anthropocentric. I think is a word. Judaism is for people, is for human beings. Meaning, no, it's we care about the earth. It guides us in how to care for animals. It says we shouldn't work our animals on Shabbat either. But animals don't have to keep mitzvahs necessarily, including kashrut. And so I know there are kosher dog foods for sale. And if your practice of kashrut means you want to get everything in the house hechshered, everything has the union label, so to speak, and you want to get kosher dog food, go right ahead. But animals, let's say pets don't have to keep kosher, right? I'll also make just sort of a historical observation. Pets is kind of an American thing. Pets is maybe not just American. Pets is kind of keeping pets is a sign of prosperity, right? And in the ancient world, people didn't keep a lot of animals necessarily that weren't functional, that weren't either pulling a plow, giving milk, laying eggs, or lying down on your dinner table eventually. That's what animals were for. There's also a historical kind of aversion to Jews keeping, and then, okay, I'm getting a lot of hate mail for this. Historically, Jews didn't keep cats and dogs as pets. Cats is kind of an Egyptian thing. Like there's a lot of history about cats, about cat worship in ancient Egypt, and we kind of avoid Egyptian stuff. There has been an historical aversion to keeping dogs as pets. Historically, recently, and especially in America, people keep lots of animals. People keep dogs and cats and fish and birds and snakes and all sorts of stuff. And I think that's a sign of our prosperity that we have the wherewithal to keep a, let's say, non-working animal in the house and feed it. And there's great benefit from that. I'm not gonna deny it. There's benefit to having animals. People see there are all sorts of studies that say people who keep animals as pets have beneficial emotional, mental health. I am a witness to and a huge fan, supporter of service animals and comfort animals and things like that. I know a recent veteran who from coming back from the Middle East, for whom having a comfort dog in his life is critical in his coping with his day-to-day life in light of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I'm not going to tell anybody, Chas v'shalom, I should tell anybody that their dog isn't a part of their family. That is a part of American culture right now, but not just American culture. I will say they don't have to keep kosher. I will say, as far as the Jewish tradition doesn't say a lot about not keeping animals as pets. There's some stuff in kashrut that talks about the idea of, and this is going to go kind of dark pretty quick, that they're animals that are not kosher for eating, you shouldn't touch their carcasses, right? And so, God forbid something happens to your pet, you're going to wind up touching a carcass. But it's not like you get hit by lightning or anything by that. It's just like you should avoid it, but you do. It has to be done. And so there's not a lot in current halakha that says like don't keep snakes, don't keep birds, don't keep dogs. There is a theme in the tradition that you should take care of your business, right? You should meet the needs of your human family. But there's also something in the halakha that says when you do have pets, you should feed your animals first. And this goes back to more like the livestock raising days. That goes to the passage in Deuteronomy from which we derive Birkat Hamazon. It says you're going to enter the land, you're going to raise crops, and your animals will be well fed, and then you will eat and be satisfied and bless. And that's where we get Birkat Hamazon from. But we also get this principle that animals eat first. When you wake up in the morning, before anybody else gets breakfast, You got to feed the animals. And that's like a neat thing to teach kids as well. If you have little kids in the house, it teaches the kids that before you plunk down and eat your Lucky Charms or whatever, you got to feed Fido first. I don't know if we give Roman dog names to animals, but you do you. And so there's nothing saying like you can't keep animals. It was kind of silent on it because keeping animals as pets, as sort of non-working animals, is a relative innovation. And so I would just stick to the stream of the tradition that says we take care of our animals' needs before we take care of our needs because they can't feed themselves, and don't be cruel to them. And that's very much frowned upon, as being cruel to animals or hurting them in some way. And so that's what I would get from the Jewish tradition on keeping pets. Doesn't say you can't keep them, doesn't say you can't keep certain kinds of ones. Pigs I would probably avoid, just it doesn't look good. But then again, there's no safer place for a pig, theoretically, than in a Jewish home. In general, just be kind to your animals. Teach other people to be kind to animals, and that is a Jewish thing to do. So let's jump back in. Don't know if you answered the question, are we volunteering on Shabbat okay to do? Just got on the video. So Suzanne, it's okay to voluntarily do on Shabbat anything that you would normally do on Shabbat. So if it's Shabbat, if you wouldn't do something for money on Shabbat, or if you wouldn't work for Shabbat, don't volunteer that way. But there are lots of other things you could do to volunteer on Shabbat. Jason Brown says, I love dogs. I'm going to say, Jason, I love dogs too. I don't have a dog right now. I'm kind of a dog uncle, right? I've had in my particular family, I have more children than I have nephews. Say I don't have any nieces. I have 2 nephews. I have 4 kids. And so I don't get to be an uncle that often. However, when I go to somebody's house and they have a dog, the dog always knows that I'm where the good scratch is at, because I give good scratches to dogs. And so I mostly enjoy other people's dogs. Kind of like maybe a grandparent. Like I scratch it, I play with the dog, and it's like, all right, here, you feed it and clean up after it. So that's how I am. Let's say Larry said, I've heard jokingly that being afraid of dogs is one common characteristic of Jews. That's in there. That's in the tradition. There's this thing that, like, okay, we don't keep dogs because dogs is something that, like, people have, chased us used. And so there's kind of an aversion there. However, 21st century America, that's less the case. I do have a teacher who is very opposed to keeping animals as pets. Like, we have enough human beings to take care of in the world, and so let's try to do that. But I'm not going to tell anybody to get rid of their dog. So we've got dogs, we've got pets. I would say don't keep like poisonous snakes. That's like and I say that having a friend who's kept lots of poisonous snakes. Like, don't do stupid, dangerous stuff. Is just a good general Jewish rule. Like, don't endanger your life. Now that means, I may have to kind of hide my face when I decide to go skydiving one day. But like, don't keep sharks. Don't keep cobras. Just don't. You shouldn't have. There is a tradition that says you shouldn't have a dangerous animal. Like, if you have a cow or something that becomes ornery, or that it's going to trample people, you're supposed to get rid of that cow. So all the more so if you have an animal that is by nature deadly, you shouldn't keep that because it might endanger other people. It's sort of the same principle as if you have like a flat roof that people can walk on, you're supposed to make a parapet, like a fence around that roof. So we've got pets, we've got volunteering. Let's see, my Hebrew question above in the feed. Let's look back up for Jason's question. What level of Hebrew do you need to be considered at an appropriate level for conversion completion? So I'll say this. There's usually not like a vocab quiz when it comes to conversion Bate Din. How I like to prepare people, and how it's sort of my general experience for other conversion classes, is it's nice to be able to decode Hebrew. And what I mean by that is you should know what sounds the letters make and what sounds the vowels markings make, because then that opens a door for you to begin Hebrew prayer. So for my students, I like to teach enough that they could open up a Siddur and, like a 4 or 5-year-old sounding out English words could sound out Baruch, Atah, etc. So Again, it's not a hard and fast test. Ask your sponsoring rabbi for what your Beit Din may insist on. They may look for fluency in reading. I don't know. They might ask that you are participating regularly in prayer. But the Hebrew that I teach for people on the path to conversion is, I think, what's called Hebrew decoding, meaning you look at it on the page, you can sound out the words, and with some practice, string those things together. Now, I'll say universal literacy is a fairly recent phenomenon in the civilized world. So to say that you've always had to be fluent in Hebrew to convert would be silly, because there were a lot of people who were illiterate who became Jewish, right? And there are a lot of Jewish people who were illiterate back in the day, and maybe still in the world now. There's lots of people, lots of Jews who can't read Hebrew at all. Much like citizenship in other arenas, there are higher standards for people joining than there are for people who are born that way. So what I would suggest, and I'm being kind of repetitive and redundant, that you should practice sounding out what sounds the letters make, and the vowels and modifying and things like that. My favorite text for this, I'm not sure if it's available where you are. It's from URJ Press. It's called Aleph Isn't Tough. There's a little bit of a pun there, because the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet are Aleph and Taf, and so it says Aleph isn't tough, right? Yeah, like TOUGH. Little punning in there. So look for the book Aleph Isn't Tough. That's my favorite resource. It really helps you string together letters and vowels very effectively, and that's the one I recommend. I use it for my adult conversion classes. I actually used it for one of my B'nai Mitzvah students who had a late start. He didn't start studying for his bar mitzvah till he was already 12, and we went from having zero ability to sound out Hebrew and recognize any letters to him reading, not memorizing, but reading aloud his Haftarah in Trope within the space of a year. So if he can do it, I bet other people out there can do it too. So let's see what else is going on here. As Drake says, my 4-year-old is the only dangerous animal I maintain. I feel your brother. I get it quite a bit. My youngest is the most rambunctious in the household too, unless I'm around, then it's me. So Vanessa asks, I've been studying with the rabbi's wife, but not the rabbi. Is this the next step? Would they be offended if I approached a different rabbi? So I'm not sure. We've talked a little bit, Vanessa, offline about who you're studying with. Often in many, especially outreach communities, where the rabbi and the rabbi's wife come as a pair, and yes, it's usually a male rabbi and a female rabbi's wife in these particular traditional communities, and they sort of come as a pair, and they both teach people like full time. And so it's not uncommon to learn with the Rebbitzin, especially if you are a woman. And so I don't know what the path is for women studying with the rabbi. That's really up to the Rebbitzin that you're studying with to tell you. I will say I seriously doubt whether they'll be offended if you study with a different rabbi. It's just based on my experience. I have a ton of rabbis in my life. There are lots of different rabbis that I've studied with, and any rabbi, and it's been very rare. I'm trying to remember one instance, and I can't, but it's very rare in my experience that a rabbi would say, "Oh, you're studying with that guy. Well, I guess we're done with," get kind of weird about it. You should study as broadly as you can. It says in Pirkei Avot, like, who is wise? One who learns from any person. And so I don't have personal experience with a rabbi who would be jealous of you learning with a different rabbi, but your mileage may vary. And so I would just ask. I would say to them, like, are you cool with me learning with a different rabbi while I'm learning with you, or I don't know, take a break or something? But if you're concerned about how they would feel, ask. Right? Because if you've been learning with this person for a while, you've obviously built up some trust and a relationship, and I don't think that person would be upset at all. They may have opinions about the other rabbis that you're studying with. Different movements have opinions about rabbis and other movements, and they may be worried that you're going to learn something dangerous or heretical or something like that. But I would just be very upfront and ask the person and say, look, I have learning from lots of different sources. And that's okay. That's a really Jewish thing to do. I'll say in maybe more insular Hasidic, Haredi communities, there is a lot of love and loyalty between a rabbi and that rabbi's students. And so people will typically have one Rebbe or one Rav and will mostly do learning from them. But that's a model that comes from very isolated communities. And in today's world, especially if you're learning on the internet, you're going to have access to a lot of different teachers and a lot of different chances to find out what's right for you. So I would say learn broadly, learn widely, be honest with everybody that you're learning from different sources, and you should be okay. I don't know a rabbi worth their salt who would be upset about you learning from another rabbi. So let's see. Question for everyone here, not just Rabbi Carrier. I've seen an increase in grossly anti-Jewish chatter online. Most of these people are obviously trolls hiding behind anonymity. Are you seeing any increase in bigotry in your private lives? I wonder how much of this is online chatter versus hatred you encounter in everyday life. So everybody can answer for themselves. In the chat, I'll answer for myself. Yes, I have seen, how do I say this? And I moderate this because maybe I just wasn't aware of it or paying attention to it. I've been more active online over the last few years than I was in the years before that. I have seen a big jump in people feeling safe communicating things that people didn't feel safe communicating before. One of the joys and concerns of the internet is that it allows people of like opinion to find each other where they weren't able to find each other before. This has had massively good benefits in the sense that people who once felt isolated can find people like them, and then they can organize communities. I had a talk with Rabbi Elad Nehorai in my recent episode just dropped last Friday of the Jew Curious Show podcast, and he's with a group called Torah Trumps Hate, which is a politically progressive, Orthodox Jewish political activist organization. And the reason I brought it up was not to endorse his particular politics, but just to say the broad stereotype is sort of the more conservative you are religiously, that tracks with being more conservative politically. And he sort of busted that myth because of online communities, people were able to reach each other and organize in ways that you haven't been able to do before. Flip that coin, and hate groups have had way more power to organize. So things that are on the fringe can now coalesce into clusters of nastiness that can then organize. And you also these days can't tell between, I hate to use the word legitimate, but I'll say you can't tell between authentic hate groups and maybe bots generated by some other foreign power, let's say, to sow discord in the American political discourse. That's a thing that's out there too. So yes, there's been a big jump in chatter. Yes, people hide behind the anonymity. I get this stuff in I get this stuff in YouTube all the time where people will comment on my videos and they'll say something snarky or slightly anti-Semitic, and I'll call them out, and then they just go full Nazi on me. And they never put their face in their profile. They never put their real name in their profile. They're always hiding behind something. I say that internet anonymity is the new white hood, referring specifically to Ku Klux Klan. Is people used to hide behind clothing. Now they hide behind internet anonymity, and they can also multiply their platforms and multiply their things. So I see a lot of that. I've seen less in terms of physical interaction and really seeing this in the world. Is there an upsurge in anti-Semitic violence? The ADL would say yes, right? Just the organization that's the Anti-Defamation League. Looking at the Southern Poverty Law Center and other organizations that track incidences of reported, documented crime happening, looking at police reports and things like that, they have seen a big jump, something like a 61% jump, I think, in California alone, of hate crimes, and specifically targeting Jewish communities. So it's happening more in the physical world. It's blown up online, certainly. And so I don't know what to tell you. I wish I did. I wish that wasn't my answer. My tactic is to preach and teach the truth about Judaism to as many different people as possible. I don't go out, hunting down people and getting into shouting matches with people who might not even be real, who certainly don't have the courage to do anything about what they're doing. Every once in a while somebody does, and that's awful. And we do have to rally around people. We do have to support our communities and show up and see who's showing up to support us. Over the last weekend, I've seen a huge outpouring from the Jewish community supporting the Muslim community, because that's what our values are, but also because the Muslim community just came out in droves for us when the whole thing happened at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. And so what we have to do is just be present, show up for each other. You can block, you can ignore, you can report. If I get an anti-Semitic tweet directed at me or some nasty gram in my YouTube comments, I always, I don't argue with people. I don't engage with people. I just block them and report them. And I think that's how we kind of keep the internet honest. My feeling about this and the role of the Jewish community when it comes to protecting not only ourselves, but protecting other minority groups is, I like to say that the Jewish people are the conscience of the world. We've been kicked out of every country on earth that's ever been a country. Right? We have endured millennia of oppression just for sticking to who we are. And so we have that genetic memory and historical record to say wherever we are in the world, we're the ones who have to speak up against this kind of oppression. And that's a heavy responsibility. You do it to the extent that you feel comfortable and you feel safe doing it, but I feel like we can't shrink back, we can't hide. And that was a big thing, when I was in a synagogue. There was a synagogue for many years where its security posture was like, okay, let's not draw attention to ourselves. That is a terrible security posture in terms of effectiveness. It's also a terrible marketing posture. Like, hey, if nobody knows we're here, we're safe. Yeah, but you're also going to not serve as many people as a community. So you have to stand up. You have to do what you love. You have to do it in public so that people can see what you love, and maybe they could use some of that too. But it also makes you more safe the more you know your neighbors. That synagogue, we have always had a good relationship with the local police department. My philosophy is you do you in public, show what you love, and maintain solid relationships as you can with as many different people in the community who get to see who you really are. And then all this anti-Semitic BS, all these stereotypes and cliches and nasty pictures of people with beards and noses and whatnot. People will see that and be like, but I know John, and John's not that, so this is BS. And so, sorry, I'm going to lose my clean lyrics sticker here. But yeah, there has been an upsurge in stuff. What do? We get up and we do what we love in public. We show people who the Jews really are. And then that takes the wind out of all the sails. I mean, most of this stuff comes from people who've never met a Jewish person or spent more than 2 minutes talking to one. And that's why they feel comfortable and safe harassing people without repercussion. And so I say, we're not going to fight hate with hate. We're not going to fight hate with hate. We have to fight hate with love. And that's the long game. Some people may think that's not the right tactic. That's okay. I've picked my side and I've picked my battle. I've picked my tactics. So I hope that's helpful for people. Let's see. Does the rabbi pick the time to bring the convert to the Beit Din, or can the candidate ask the rabbi if she feels ready? So great question, Tanya. How I always work with my people that I sponsor is I say to them, this is like for my disclaimers up front, I will be happy to sponsor you for conversion when we both feel you are ready. And so that's not an either or, it's sort of a two-way street. And so I like to see people go through a complete course of study. That means, I teach a class that goes 18 weeks long, and it's 18 weeks. That doesn't mean that person's only studying for 18 weeks. Chances are they've learned a lot about Judaism before they came to me. They may have been in a Jewish family for a year or two. And so when I know that people have taken a complete course of study, then I start having that conversation with them and ask them if they're ready. Sometimes I think people are ready before they think they're ready, right? But I can't push them. I can, give them a little nudge. But I always say that we'll go to the Beit Din when you think you're ready and when I agree with you. Because the sponsor's recommendation has a great weight on the Beit Din. a Beit Din usually doesn't, only likes to talk to people who have a sponsoring rabbi who knows that person if the Beit Din doesn't know that person. And then they give the sponsoring rabbi a lot of weight in whether that person is ready to come in the first place. It's like I don't know that I've ever been on a Beit Din where we turned somebody away. I mean, there were some close calls, there were some sidebars, so don't get me wrong, but usually 99 times out of 100, that person is ready when they get there. The sponsoring rabbi is not going to bring somebody who's not ready. So if you feel you're ready, and maybe your sponsoring rabbi doesn't, I would do two things. First, make the case, like say, I'm ready because this, and this, but also hear that rabbi's concerns. That rabbi may say, yeah, but you've been doing this for like 2 weeks. You're a very fast reader. That's great. But you should live more of a Jewish experience. You should have more wrestling with what you've learned. And so, I would be open to what that sponsor has to say. And also, if you don't feel you're ready and the sponsor says, yeah, you are, listen to that too, because I had one person in a class who, took an intro class and then another class and another class, and then she wanted to take an adult B'nai Mitzvah class. I'm like, this is the one thing that you kind of have to be Jewish to do, to have a bat mitzvah. And so I said, what's your holdup? Like, you haven't wanted to convert yet for some reason. What is your holdup? And we had to kind of work through that anxiety. She'd been living a Jewish life for a long time. She was very knowledgeable. She just didn't feel, I don't know, worthy. And that's something that the rabbi said back in the Shulchan Aruch. If somebody comes to you to convert, and you're just supposed to say to them, like, it sucks sometimes, right? It's hard being a Jew. There's lots of stuff you have to do. There's lots of stuff you have to not do. And people attack us a lot. And if they say, yes, I understand all of those things, and I'm not worthy, that's the person you want to convert, right? That's the person that says, the Shulchan Aruch says, you get them in the mikvah immediately before they have a chance to change their mind. And so if you don't feel ready, that is a noble sentiment, and that could be a sign that you are, in fact, exactly the right candidate. But just work that out with your sponsoring rabbi. I think that's why that relationship is important. And when you both agree that it's time to go, that's when it's time to go. So I hope that's helpful for you. Let's see what else is going on. This has been a great conversation. I'm gonna confess, I was a little bit scared. 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, with nothing really set to talk about. How is this going to go? So let's see. Okay, is the microphone crackly or is it just me? My microphone is sometimes crackly. This is not a state-of-the-art recording studio. This is my dining room. So thanks for hanging out. Malo says, main topics, I'd like you to really hear your thoughts on Kabbalah and Messianic Judaism. Also, your microphone static is still pretty bad. I apologize, guys. Let me try this out. Maybe a 1-2, and my name is Bismarck. Okay, let's see if that helps at all. I apologize for that. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. So, I want to ask about, can you still see my face? I don't want to mess with it too much. Make sure all the leads are in. So somebody was asking about Kabbalah. This is a question I get a lot. I tend to, again, this is my opinion, I tend to go by what it's, the sort of, I'll say, Talmudic tradition of Kabbalah isn't something you study first about Judaism. If anything, it's something you study last or later about Judaism. Kabbalah, the word itself means receipt or receiving. It means it's something you get from a teacher that's usually largely through an oral tradition, right? There's lots of Kabbalistic texts. You can study Zohar. You can study the writings of Isaac Luria and Cordovera and all that stuff. But it's not something you can jump in by yourself. You really have to have an Obi-Wan. You have to have a Yoda for that. You have to have a Rabbi who has studied this himself or herself and can pass on what they learned from their teacher with these texts as a reference. And the traditional mode of studying Kabbalah is you do that after you have significant mastery of other materials from our tradition, right? This presumes that you've studied Torah as a school child, right? And you've studied Mishnah at a young age, and maybe you've studied Talmud in your teenage years. And the Midrash and all that stuff. And so by the time you get to Kabbalah study, you are well versed in all the more, let's say, surface level understandings of the Jewish tradition. And it's also presumes, and this goes back to another thing in Pirkei Avot where it says, 40 is the age of wisdom. This is sometimes thought to mean that's when you start, people don't start studying Kabbalah until they're 40, assuming they've been studying Torah their whole life before that. Because this goes to another thing in the Talmud, I think in the Chagiga, where it says, there are four things that it's better that you would never be born than to spend your time studying these four things. And that's what's above, what's below, what's before, and what's after. Meaning what happened before the creation of the world, what happens after, sort of end times, what is heaven like, what is hell like. All of these metaphysical things that Kabbalah spends a lot of time on, the rabbis of the Talmud were like really pushing people away from it. The reason is they saw that if you dwelt on these metaphysical things before you had a deep understanding of the easy stuff, let's say, you could go mad. Like literally, they saw people wasting away and neglecting their families, neglecting their work in the world. And so they say, this is something you do after you've studied everything else to some degree of proficiency, after you have established your family, your business, become a somewhat mature, steady, stable individual, then you can study that stuff. The flip side of this is that Kabbalah has always attracted seekers. And when I say always, I mean going back a couple of thousand years. My teacher of Kabbalah, Rabbi Pinchas Giller, said that Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism has always been like the street religion of Judaism. It's like the crystals and the sages and like the herbs and stuff, that kind of very attractive surface level stuff when the sit down and learn stuff is boring and off-putting. And so it's always attracted superficial study, but it's always also been understood to get the most out of it when you've already studied everything else. Right? And so there are teachers who will teach people with no understanding of anything else. And they'll say, this is really all you have to learn. You don't have to learn the Torah stuff. And there are teachers who will refuse to study or refuse to teach Kabbalah. I don't refuse to teach it. I'm still waiting to be at that level of mastery where I get into it. And until then, I don't encourage people to study it until they've reached a level of mastery, and then they find a competent teacher. This is mostly studied in, let's say, Haredi and Hasidic circles, where people do grow up learning the entire Masorah. By the time they're 20, 30, 40 years old, they have stable family lives. They may have their own business or work, and that they are suited to study. Whereas in other movements of Judaism, you don't have that depth of study as an assumption. And so my advice, you can glean a lot of great stuff from Kabbalah. There are popular books on the subject. I'm not going to say don't read any books. Read whatever books come to you. But if you are trying to understand Kabbalah, and let's say you don't practice Shabbat, and you don't practice Kashrut, and you aren't praying on a regular basis, know that you are conducting your life in a way that the Kabbalistic masters would have very much disagreed with. Right? They assume that if you're learning this stuff, you already practice Shabbat, you already practice Kashrut, and if you're just coming in for a quick hit, at best, you're not going to really get the true meaning. At worst, you could sort of psychically, spiritually injure yourself because you're going down a wrong path for which you had no preparation. So that sounds a little hokey pokey, a little bit supernatural maybe. I don't get that much. I've always said, there's people who say I'm spiritual but not religious. For most of my life, I was the opposite of that. I was religious but not spiritual. I've opened up in the spiritual way over the last few years. But I'll just say, if that rant wasn't enough to tell you, I wouldn't go into studying Kabbalah lightly or with anybody who tells you that it is the answer and the only answer if you don't have a grounding in the Jewish tradition. They're probably just selling you something. That's my particular take on that. So, all right, it's a better answer for older folks. I like that. I like to say people, adults of long standing. I don't like to be ageist. Let's see what else is going on here. Messianic Judaism. Okay, I get asked this enough that I'm going to go ahead and take a stand. I haven't really done a video on this per se. I don't like bashing other people's groups. I don't like yucking other people's yums. If you're learning with me, you should probably know where I stand. Messianic Judaism is a form of Christianity. It is not, to me, a form of Judaism. There are Jews who believe in Jesus, and that is a kind of apostasy. But it's Jews who practice it, so it's a Jewish thing to do. That doesn't mean that Messianic Judaism is a subset of Judaism. It is not. It is a subset of Christianity that sort of mixes in some things of Judaism. I know a guy I consider a friend who is a Messianic Jewish teacher, and his grandparents on all sides are like Holocaust survivors. He is legit Jewish by every halakhic measure, and yet he has been inspired to follow this path in his life and to teach people who are following Christ. I don't consider that to be I mean, he's a Jewish person, maybe teaching other Jewish people, but that's not what Judaism is there to teach. And so I think that is a diversion that fits more in the category of Christianity than it does in Judaism. It grinds my gears sometimes to see teachers of Christianity calling themselves rabbis, but rabbi is just a Hebrew word for teacher, and so if they want to do that, it doesn't take away from me at all, but that's just something that comes up. I'm glad you asked it. I'm not going to make a whole thing bashing Messianic Judaism. I don't think it needs bashing. It's not really that big a movement, but I'll just say I personally don't consider Messianic Judaism to be a form of Judaism. I respect it as a form of Christianity, and you do you. Those teachers will teach who they teach. You will learn with who you want to learn with. If you want to come to me, I'm here to teach Judaism. So that's what's up. Let's see, Jason says, can I plug Simon Schama's Story of the Jews, volumes 1 and 2? He also did a BBC show to complement the books. As a convert and lover of history, these books are really wonderful. Looks like you just did, so I give you a shout out. You can do that as well. So let's see. Grysicle said, my mic is crackly. Yes, it's still crackly, and you'd be escorted off Stephanie Miller. I don't know who Stephanie Miller is, but now I've got something to Google. You're not coming through, static and all. Can people still hear me okay? Let's give that a try. All right. Well, let's see. We'll work on the microphone for next time. We've been going for about an hour, folks. My wife and kids are about to come back from the gym, so I'm going to shut this down. Listen, this has been a great time to talk. Oh, somebody snuck in a question here at the end. Hello, Rabbi and everyone. I'm from San Antonio. Could you explain the Noahide movement, please? I did say ask me anything. I kind of want to punt this until I know that my microphone sounds better. So there is a tradition that there are 7 laws in the Torah that appear before, that are given to Noah and appear before the advent of sort of covenantal, commandment-y Judaism, that these laws apply to all people, not just to Jews. There are teachings that, okay, you can be Yirah Hashem, you can be a follower and fearer of God by following these 7 laws. I want to unpack this at greater length when I know my microphone is working, because I think that, yes, while this is legitimate and while people have endorsed this as a righteous way of being, you don't have to be Jewish to have a kind of a Jewish understanding of God. I also feel personally like this Noahide movement is being used to push people away from Judaism on an ethnocentric basis. And so I think there are people who teach, yes, you shouldn't be Jewish unless you really, really want to be, but you can still follow these things. I also see this as a stick used to push people away that I think is unfair. So somebody shared a link, so I'm going to go ahead and show that because I trust this person to share good links. Okay, so that's my short take on the no hide movement. I want to do a longer video about that, just to unpack exactly what these 7 no hide laws are and how people follow it today. I need to do a little bit of research. I get a lot of students who have studied with, let's say, an Orthodox rabbi who have discouraged them from becoming Jewish and said, just follow all the no hide laws, you're fine. When I have gotten to know these people and seen people who are really thirsting for Judaism, who are looking for, let's say, an additional 606 mitzvot, I'll put it that way. So thank you, everybody, for being on this session. I apologize for the static. I am blown away that we made Minyan on a Sunday morning and then some. And so thanks for doing this. For the rest of the week, we have topics planned out for the next 3 days. I'm taking a deep dive into Purim. First, what are the 4 mitzvot of Purim? What are the 4 main things you're supposed to get done? The answer may surprise you. What's with the costumes is what we're going to do on Tuesday. And what's with the drinking is what we're going to do on Wednesday. Thursday, we're going to talk about Jewish denominations and kind of the history of, we'll say, the big 3, but then some more beyond that, of Jewish denominations active in the world today. And then on Friday, of course, we're going to wrap it up with our Parashat HaShavua, this week's Torah portion, which is Tzav. And we'll learn all about that on Friday. Feel free to tune into this anytime, into the Jew Curious Show podcast. And I said, ask me anything. You sure did. And I am much obliged. Until next time, heroes, peace.